episode. So again, this is the podcast for all my truck drivers, all my owner operators, all my investors, or anyone just interested in trucking. We're reporting live from Fair Lawn, New Jersey. So if you are in New Jersey and you would like to be on the show, please contact us. Let us know. We're here. And of course, we have our panelists. We have Melissa and Majimbu.
Hey.
Yes. We're back at it.
And then we have a very, very special guest today, the powerhouse herself, Tannia.
Welcome, Tannia.
Tannia
Welcome,
is
Tannia.
an attorney. She has her own practice. It's Tannia Ospinal Law.
The Ospinal Law Firm.
The Ospinal Law Firm. I've worked with Tannia before. We did events before where she would, discuss law and I would discuss accounting. And I know, she has so much good information. So this is an episode you don't want to miss. So stay tuned to the end, and we're gonna dive right into it.
Right. Today we're gonna be talking about everything from contracts to lawsuits and anything in between. To help our fellow truckers.
Yeah. So happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Tannia, for being here.
Right.
So is this your first time on a podcast?
I've been on other podcasts, but not the level of this
Okay,
production.
there's levels. You
Really?
hear that?
I
There's
feel like,
levels.
yeah, this is a level.
Well, much appreciated.
Usually on Zoom, we get on Zoom, we record.
Okay.
This is
Right.
it, but not this. This is like, I feel like I'm on a
There's
radio
levels
station.
to this. You hear?
Yes.
There's
Excellent,
levels.
excellent. We are a radio station, LMP
Yeah.
radio station.
Yeah.
Yes, it's open.
Very
It's open.
cool.
LMP radio station.
So Tannia, tell us a little bit about some of the legal issues that you pretty much face with in the trucking industry or with truck drivers or owner operators.
Okay, so before I get started, I wanted to just say, so thankful to be here. Thank you to everyone for inviting me. I've been a fan of the podcast. I think it's so interesting that you have this podcast about truck driving and getting into it. So of course, I'm a lawyer, so I have to give a disclaimer, right?
Yes.
Everything that I'm going to be talking about today is not specific legal advice for your situation. This is just general information and just general things I've come across in the practice of law and being a lawyer for business owners and small business owners and individuals, honestly, that come to me with issues.
Okay.
So what I've seen in the trucking community a lot is they have issues with contracts.
Contracts.
Then also they get misclassified as independent contractors when they're acting like employees, especially in the state of New Jersey.
That's a
And
spicy
also,
topic.
and also, this, who is responsible for accidents when accidents happen? Who is not responsible, who is negligent, and kind of like the liability issues in these situations.
Okay. Let's talk about those contracts. Are people just signing it without reading?
Yes.
Okay.
That's,
Yes.
that's
there
always
only-
a problem.
Okay. Physical contracts. Have you came across a situation where it was a verbal contract? Agreements between friends, family members that went south, and can anything be done in that situation?
Okay, so that's I have a lot to say about that. What I will say is that I feel like what happens is that usually you really want a job. You
Right.
really want this job, you really want this opportunity. So you don't read the contract and you just sign it. You just sign it and you don't understand. And even if you try to read it, some of these contract terms are difficult.
Right.
Even as lawyers, sometimes, I'll talk to another lawyer about this specific term. I'm like, doesn't that read a little
Weird.
different? I think we should be more clear here. So it's 1, they don't read it. 2, they don't understand it. 3, sometimes I think also they don't have contracts.
Right.
And they're kind of like going off by people's goodwill. Hopefully this person is good to me and I believe in them. And even if sometimes when it's family, and it's sad to say, but sometimes that's especially, the situation that
There's
that
a lot.
you need to have a
get you.
contract with,
Right. There's a lot of people that have contracts that don't read the small lines or the small letters, let's say. Or there's a lot of people that don't read between the lines. Then there are other people that do lease purchase agreement. So some people that have contracts that don't read, they get in trouble. They come to you to try and fix the situation. Other people go for the lease purchase agreement. And what do you think about that? Is it something that it's worth it, or it's more of a hole for yourself?
So, are you asking me, should they go to an attorney?
Because a lot of people break contracts, right? Breaking the contracts, they come to you because they get kind of sued or whatever the case might be.
Yeah, so people come to me to try to get out of contracts all the time. And I do think you should always, before you do anything where you might be in a lot of trouble, you might face, you might have to go to court, you want to consult with an attorney. I mean, at least to give you some sort of advice as to what you should do or some options for you.
Right.
You should. You should.
So
If there's a verbal kind of like contract where, how Melissa explained earlier, where there's family members and there's just verbal and there's nothing written, do these people have a case in court?
So here's the situation.
there could be text messages supporting those contracts, and paperwork like supporting that person's story. So what? But there's no contract signed. It's just like I said, like verbal.
So here's the thing that, you could say that a contract was formed in the way that people were acting, right? But it's really hard to prove. And then you still have to go to court.
Right.
Right. So now when you go to court, you're not just going to spend $100 going to court.
That's expensive.
You're going to spend a few thousand going to court. So at that point it becomes, is this worth me going to court and trying to fight it?
Right.
If I know I don't have a great case, a good lawyer is going to tell you, don't spend your money here, move on to something else, or, someone, or they might say, let's go for it. I think you also, everyone that's kind of in this business world should meet some lawyer that they trust or have a relationship with, because, sooner or later you're going to run into a situation and you're going to need to know that you could trust someone's advice.
Right.
Let me ask you something. Being a trucker, what is like the minimum standard of whatever case could be that you can go to a lawyer? Because a lot of people, like you just said, they want to go to a lawyer for whatever because they want to find an easy payday, right? So what would be your advice to those people out there? And it's not that you don't want business, it's just that you don't want to malpractice, whatever. You understand? So what would be the starting point for your lawyer to take action?
I would say it depends on each situation, right? Sometimes truckers have employment issues. So in wages, right, they haven't been paid their wages correctly.
Right.
And now that's significant. So that's worth pursuing sometimes, right?
So what's the minimum of a wage that a person could pursue a lawyer to get paid? Any amount, or is there like a specific amount where a lawyer could say, okay, yeah, this is
Because I know some like a whatever amount it would be considered as a civil lawsuit, and then
It's a small court, yeah.
small claims court. So what? It's that number that.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. Like,
Okay.
some things don't qualify for civil because it would be employment issues. It would depend, right?
Okay.
Because especially if you had some sort of employment relationship, or it depends. So, my advice would be, see if there's someone that does a consultation for a flat fee, which means you pay them a certain amount for an hour, and then talk to them about your situation. And if it's worth pursuing, they're going to say, look, this is how much it's going to cost. And if it's obviously you would potentially gain more than you're going to spend, that's something worth pursuing, right?
And that is an honest, lawyer. Because
Yes.
sometimes some lawyers might just want to make a buck, and they won't give you the right advice. So hopefully,
Look,
somebody you could trust.
And sometimes, like my clients, there's certain situations. I just said this 2 weeks ago to someone. I said, look, even if we fight this, we're going to lose. And you're going to spend a lot of money. And it's not worth fighting. So sometimes I have to convince my client, this is not worth fighting because we're going to lose.
Okay.
So even if you want to pay me to try to go for this is not a good case. I don't see a real legal issue that we could win on. Lawyers have ethics that we
Right.
live by, and usually we're gonna say this. There's no case
worth
here.
One quick
it's not worth
question:
it.
what is the percentage of clients that you have that are truckers?
I would say in the trucking business, on the employer side and independent contractor side, I would say about 15%.
50%.
And what are some of the issues that you deal with these clientels? What are the main issues mainly?
So a lot of trying to get themselves out of paying someone as a employee,
Wow.
and what you could do to kind of make them independent contractors, classify them as specifically. I mean, everyone knows why employers don't want to have employees, right? I mean,
Let's
it's-
just in case
taxes.
nobody does.
Okay, let's talk about
Let's-
that.
yeah.
We
Yeah,
have
yeah,
a
yeah.
we have
About that,
a
right? No, this-
episode on this like previously that we recorded.
Okay,
so now
so-
we're actually getting the information from an attorney. So pay attention, guys.
Right.
Yeah, so obviously, I mean, think about it. It comes down to taxes, money that they spend, right? Benefits that they potentially might now have to pay someone. It also comes down to just really money.
Right.
It's more of a cost. It's more of a liability. You know, at the end of the day, sometimes this is wrong, right? It's
Right.
wrong, and people that should be employees, right, are getting paid as independent contractors. And I see it as, I think people need to push back on that. I think the trucking community needs to push back on that.
The thing is that in the trucking community, everyone wants to be an independent contractor. Everybody, the internet has glorified being an independent contractor, making your own money, being your own boss, but that comes with a lot of responsibility. But they get confused between actually being an independent contractor, which means that you have your own MC, your own DOT, and leasing onto a company. When you lease onto a company, yeah, you're the owner of that truck and you're operating it, but you have really no say in what work you can do and absolutely really nothing. You have to literally go and abide by the laws and regulations of that company.
Right. And on the other hand, then you have, all different sizes of companies. We have, people who own fleets that are small, some medium, some large. So therefore, the overhead of payroll for a small company or a small fleet of company is obviously going to be more of a burden for that little company than those big companies. So, that cost, they try to avoid it only because they need cash flow. Especially in this industry, it's really, really hard to, operate without cash or cash flow because anything can happen. As soon as a truck breaks down, you have to, all of your emergency funds are gone, depending
Right.
on the type of, mechanical issue that it can be. So it's you have to be really careful. So I'm sure, like, to cut corners, they try to avoid paying a lot of their employees through payroll and then just give them that 1099 because it's so much easier. And most drivers also, when it comes down to those small companies, they're really not taking it really serious. They're older trucks. They're not. They just want fast money. It's just like kind of like just pay me and I'll go. I'll take care of everything, even though they're not prepared, for that burden later on at the end of the year, or even with taxes, like paying quarterly taxes. No one pays quarterly taxes. They wait till the end of the year. They completely reduce their income, and now there's nothing. You build no wealth. They're not building anything for themselves. So I think that's another issue too with the payroll. So I'm pretty sure that is a big issue with a lot of truck drivers. And then obviously the lease. I know for us also DOT. Have you dealt with DOT?
No.
Violations.
Mostly employment classifications. But, the thing is that if you get caught by the state and then they start investigating you, even to pay a lawyer to clean it up for you, you're paying a lot of money.
Thousands of dollars, yes.
Several thousands of dollars.
So
we
these
saw
So
the case.
it's not worth it, in my opinion.
So these companies that are mislabeling employees, independent contractors as that independent contractors, when they go to you and you have to fight in court, what have been the results? Have you won in favor of those companies, or have they lost and they have to classify those employers, owner operators as employees and give them the benefits and stuff?
So at that point, once they already are in the hands of the state, they have to. I refer them out to another lawyer.
Okay.
Because at that point, they need someone that's also a tax lawyer to help
Okay.
them.
They're
Because
in deep.
yeah, it's pretty bad.
So
It's pretty bad.
what is the best way for, let's say, X person has a company. I'm a driver. I don't have trucks. They have trucks, and I start working for them. What is the best for me as an employer?
If you were the employer.
Yeah, if I'm I'm the employee. Excuse me. What is the best way for me to get paid? What would my classification be?
Well, it would depend on everything, right? But you have to look at, did this employer give you an independent contractor agreement, right? Did they make you sign a contract saying that you're an independent contractor? Do they also, there's a test in New Jersey, specifically for New Jersey, that tells you whether someone should be classified as an employee or as an independent contractor.
Right.
So you go through that test.
Right. So, going through that test, is it better being a W-2 or a 1099? Because for you to be a 1099, what
What
do
are the
you have to
requirements?
do? Yeah. What, as a driver, what do you require? What is required of you to do to be a legal, legit 1099?
So they look at a lot of different factors, but one of them that they look at specifically is also that you have your own company set up. You know,
So,
and
as a driver, I
as a-
create a LLC.
that you have your own company set up, and then you drive for a few people. You know, they that you have the freedom, right, to provide different services to people.
So what type of freelancer would I be? I'm not a freelancer no more.
You're
Or am
independent
I?
contractor.
Independent contractor.
Independent contractor.
Independent contractor, because you're able to contract independently with different companies. They also look at whether you signed that agreement, whether you are working for other people, whether you have an LLC set up. They look at a lot of different factors. But mostly, if someone is working only for one company, they're controlling your hours, they're paying you. I know some payments are different, right? They also look at how are you getting paid.
How are you getting paid? Yes.
Some
How are
of
you
those
getting
lease
paid?
agreements, they get paid by the load. By the
Exactly.
move.
So that's another way that, that is a little tricky, because now they're like, okay, no, this person's getting paid per project, right? Per
Right.
load. Usually in this situation, maybe they should have gotten paid hourly.
Oh,
and then
yeah.
you should have been, and maybe if you would have gotten paid hourly and you calculate it, it's not too much money once you figure it out.
So
right?
is there a specific bracket being an independent contractor as a driver that you have to be in? Because so you won't have to, as a driver, would you have to get a DOT or what would that be
That's
as
the
a driver?
That's the thing, that in the trucking industry, unless you have your own MC number and DOT number, you cannot get your own work. You cannot work for different brokers. You cannot pull for different, because you don't have the permission. That's what the DOT, the MC is.
Right.
So
the
when you
authority.
lease, right, the authority, when you lease onto a company and that contract is specifically says you cannot haul for any other company but us, but then they're labeled as independent contractors, and that's not an independent contractor.
That's where it becomes a problem, right?
Right.
So a lot of the times, what happens too, that sometimes these drivers get mad at their employers and then they report them. And that's why these companies get investigated.
Right.
Because they agree at first, and then later on they renege.
Wow.
And then they're
Oh,
like,
wait.
well, I never got paid holidays. I never got paid overtime. And
But
I
did you
worked
read that in the
till
contract?
That's
this
paying
and
as
that,
a
and-
that's paying as a W-2, because I don't think independent contractors fall under that, or do they?
But people don't understand their situation, right? They're like, in this situation, when I reviewed this contract was not a good contract either that they had signed.
So basically, if
It gets very, very complicated.
So it's like they trick people to.
you should, before you
Well,
sign
not
any
really, because
contract,
you have to read, right?
before you sign any contract, you should consult a lawyer.
Yeah, I
Read this
think,
over with me.
or at least like learn a little bit about what these terms mean. You have to really educate yourself. I mean, now we're living in this world where there's so much accessible information. We have Google, we have YouTube.
Education
You
is
have
key.
to really understand what you're signing, and I think that's not just for truckers. I think that's everyone.
Right.
So what was the most obvious case that when they came to you and you read the contract, you was like, wow, I can't believe this?
That you even signed this.
Yeah, I mean, one. I remember one that it was like a 2-page contract. It was really and it had conflicting terms. So that means in one part of the contract, it said something different than another part of the contract, right? So at that point, it becomes
Contradiction.
What is it?
What is it then?
Yeah, is it this or
What
that?
is it, this or that? So the contract's not good, right? So you can easily break a contract like that because there's conflicting terms.
Right, right.
So in that situation, this person was like, oh, well, I wrote the contract myself. And, people shouldn't be writing contracts
So
themselves.
they just stuck themselves.
They're not going to protect you the way that you want them to protect you.
And now
Right.
that we're on that subject of protection, in terms of like for some of these drivers and owner operators to form certain business formations, what do you recommend? LLCs? Do you recommend corporations, S corps? How do you feel about that?
So I always tell people that it depends on their tax situation too, right?
Absolutely.
I think, like, I'm not going to pretend to be a tax attorney. I leave it to the CPAs. I think for me personally, I do like LLCs because they're easy to start. They're easy to run. They're not as complicated as different business entities. But then I do believe that depending on the type of business or what you are doing in your business, maybe a corporation would be better for you. So I would say LLC, but it depends on your tax situation and your goals ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, from my experience, I'll kind of like touch on this. If you are a driver, if you are actually a driver working for a company, then you should probably open an LLC for all your, expenses, even though you cannot expense anything on your taxes that is reimbursed by your employer. However, there are other expenses, and if you do other things on the side that are related to trucking, for example, Majin Boo, you are a truck driver. However, you also do a podcast in, trucking. So all of your mileage, all of your gas, you can actually write off through an LLC because now, your W-2, you're paying all these taxes, and now you can offset some of the taxes that you paid through your W-2 job through that LLC and get some of that money back in a big refund. Now, if you're an independent contractor and you have your own truck, you bought your truck, and you're either making a lot of money and you're getting paid by a 1099, not a W-2, then I do suggest being taxed as an S corp. Depending on how big you are, right? So if you're like you have a dump truck business and you have 60 trucks, maybe a corporation would be best for you, just a C corp. But if you're not as big, being taxed as an S corp, you can put yourself on payroll. Now you can, you don't have to hide your income. You can pay everyone else through that same payroll and, report high income. I think a lot of people forget that, especially like in trucking, like it's so easy to, be out of the game, like really, really fast if you don't take care of your operations the way that they need to be taken care of. So nothing is permanent until you make it permanent, right? You need a couple years in the business. And I feel like we come from nothing, especially when you come from nothing, you have to think about, don't think so much about the expenses, think about really reporting high income. Like, I think we sell ourselves short and we don't grow as a community, as people, because we want to pay less taxes. So don't do the shortcuts, report high income, do it the right way, pay the right taxes. Don't overpay taxes, but pay the right taxes through the correct business formations, and do things the right way. Because if we don't show income, we're never gonna grow. Like you're
Right.
never gonna scale.
Don't
So-
think about today. Think about tomorrow. Think
Yes.
about the big picture.
Yeah.
Income is the way, and a lot of people would like to know what is the fee of you creating a LLC for them.
So if it's a simple LLC, and I
What would
guess
be a simple LLC?
and then no contract. So I have different packages. They could just reach out to me.
Right.
I have
right.
different packages because some people need operating agreements or partnership agreements as part of their business formation. But I'm not turning away business, but I do think forming an LLC is kind of easy.
Right.
I think you should do it yourselves.
Right.
If that's a business entity you're going to choose, you can literally go to the New Jersey, business website, you register the business, you get the EIN, you have the EIN, open up a business bank account, open up a business credit card, all using the same EIN, same address. Not turning away business, but I do think it's something you could do yourselves, guys.
Right.
And
Excellent.
I recommend it,
Yeah, I mean, for some people it's easy. For some people, they might need the help.
The help.
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of a big Hispanic community too. So I think it can get a little complicated in that term. But yeah, we're always here to help.
We're here. Y hablo español too, so.
Yes,
Oh,
that's very
excellent.
important.
So
Do you recommend for, well, I'm sure you're gonna say yes, for a trucking business and a small carrier to retain a lawyer?
Definitely. I mean, I don't think you have to have like a subscription with the lawyer just yet, but maybe if your business is bigger, you should have a lawyer on retainer, because especially if you're managing different employee issues, different issues, contractual issues that you get involved in with vendors. I mean, I've seen some of the vendor contracts too, and I think that they're pretty crazy, some of these vendor contracts. And when it comes to do, with situations with accidents or if, for example, if you're moving vehicles and the vehicle gets destroyed, how much you have to pay in penalties, like certain things like that, you want to make sure you understand, because that's a lot of money some of these
And do you also
companies get involved,
do you also create contracts? Like, say, I have a carrier business, right? And I am interested in doing business with a shipper. Would you be able to create the contract for us carriers to deal with that shipper?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So I think a lot of people need to you can't just go by word. Like, putting a contract in place with anyone that you do work with, I think is very, very important. I mean, the brokers on DAT boards or on the low boards, there's nothing that you can do. They send you the contract. Most of these brokers,
Those rate confirmations are the contracts.
yeah, you sign them right away because you need the work. And we were just speaking on that, which is a major issue now, because they want the brokers to actually disclose what we're signing and what the real prices for these loads are, and they're kind of like refusing to do so.
Right.
It's like a big thing.
A gray area. The FMCSA wanted broker transparency. Right now, they send you a rate confirmation for whatever amount the load is paying, but behind that price, they bought it, or the freight forwarder gave it to them for whatever amount, and we don't know what that amount. How do I know that this 1,200 is a decent percentage of the total cost? So they want the brokers to be they want the carriers to be able to request that information from the broker within 48 hours. They have to turn it over, but they're refusing to do that. They don't want to do that.
And just
so,
a
like,
little
why?
breakdown on that so people understand. So a shipper usually is the one that's given the work. And then the broker is the middleman between the shipper and the carrier. The carriers are the trucks and the drivers. So now this broker is asking, they're the salespeople. So they're actually, getting the loads for about $1,000, but they're paying a carrier only $300. They're supposed to, by law, before they were supposed to stay with about 15 to 30%, but they're staying with over 50%, sometimes 80% of the money. So this is where the conflict, comes, because now the drivers feel like they're not surviving. The loads aren't as high as they used to be.
The overhead of
a trucking company is too high to operate with such low profit. So I think that's where the law begins. And then the brokers have bonds. So say like the brokers don't pay us, we can sue their bond, or we can file claims against their bonds. But That's a whole process within itself. Have you dealt with that before?
I have not dealt with that, but I've heard of that. And I think that's the problem too, that I was talking about that with someone about how the trucking business isn't sustainable if people can't make a living.
Right.
Right.
Right. So that there's a problem that, they want to have these people as independent contractors, but people are not making a living.
Yep.
So how are you going to have these people moving stuff for you? So I think that's a big problem. And I think that that's a good thing, that there's some transparency. I do think that some people, are able to get these larger deals and contracts because of the years that they have in business and kind of.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of different metrics that, allow some of these people. Some people just have the gift of gab. Like, they can sell water to a fish. Like, but if you, I think like even us, like sometimes like the Hispanic community, which is makes up a lot of, the workforce here, even though, now they're trying to also take Spanish speaking drivers out of the industry. And they, if you don't speak English, you can't drive. That's the new law. But, some of these, if everyone really got together and started to sell their brand, I mean, we can really eliminate the brokers. Like, if we really wanted to, we can eliminate the brokers. And I think a lot of shippers are actually willing to work with carriers versus, working with the brokers. But the brokers make it easy. They, if it's a big shipper and they have to ship everywhere in the country, they're more accessible with drivers and all over the country. Sometimes we're too local for them, depending on the size of that shipper.
Well, I think you just said something very important. I think also independent truck drivers have to be better business people.
Yeah.
And
That's
really
the
learn
thing.
how to sell themselves better, because, I've spoken to some of these people that own these bigger companies, and they're really great at business, and they do not give up. They have these contracts and these deals because they went after them. They sort of chased these
Right.
deals. So I think, I know it's hard to learn, but I mean, there's this saying that Cubans say. I'm not Cuban. I'm Ecuadorian. They say, el que no llora, no. El que no llora no mama. Right?
Come
En
on.
Dominicana así mismo lo dicen, el que no
El
llora
que no
no
grita no
mama. El que
mama.
no grita no mama, exacto.
Yeah.
A closed mouth don't get fed. Translated
Exactly.
in English. Okay?
It sounds better in Spanish, though, right? It's the saying. One of my Cuban, really, she's a great attorney. She says that to me
All the time.
because sometimes,
You have to
even-
go for it.
It's not just about
Latinos. We sometimes don't go for things because we're like, oh,
Scared.
we don't
Scared money don't make no
Should I or should I not?
Right. The insecurities,
Insecurity.
the
And
language barriers.
It's not just about owning the truck. You, at the end of the day, you own the truck because you want to run a business. So you have to know how to actually run the business. Like,
Exactly.
it's not just driving it. Like, how are you going to get the work for that truck?
Listen, you can do it, and especially if you have a great team and you're equipped with the right people like Tannia. I mean, it should be a breeze, right? Right, Tannia?
And I want to give a shout out to...
I want people to start making money before they hire me, though.
Right.
Make
You're getting a lot of short ends, huh?
I do want to give a shout out to the New York Commercial Driving School located in New York. If you're interested in obtaining your CDL, you can go right ahead over there and they'll take care of you. They're located in 4243 Broadway between West 180 and West 181st Street. Tell them the 95 Trucking Pod sent you and they will take care of you.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
the
That's
New
where I
York
got
truck-
my CDL 9
There you
years
go.
ago.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
New
look
York.
at
Yeah,
that.
I've known Elio for a while. They're very good. They have cars and everything there.
Nice.
Yeah.
Now, we wanted to bring up a special case. Melissa, would you like to give the details of the case? And we're going to have Tannia give her opinion on how she feels about this case.
Okay.
Okay.
So,
I'm nervous to hear what happened. No, I like juicy stories. I really do.
Do we have to pay for this, Tannia?
No,
1
so
hour.
Like I said, this
So-
is the information, not advice.
so this person I know, they got into business. They first started as a driver for this small carrier, let's say. And then, they wanted to go ahead and purchase their own truck. So they spoke about it and they drew up a contract, but it was never signed. But the driver started making the payments necessary towards purchasing that truck. Then,
Okay.
mhm.
So the company bought the.
The company already had the truck, and the person started as a driver.
Oh, okay.
And then, after a few months working with them, they're like, oh, hey, I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to go ahead and can I purchase this specific truck that I've been driving? They agreed verbally. They drew up a contract, but the contract was never signed. But the driver started paying the dues like if the contract was signed. Insurance, truck payments, tolls, everything, right? And after all of those deductions, the driver was supposed to get paid. At first, they were getting paid, but then a third person came into the picture, and the driver started running loads for that person too. And everything was basically verbal, but there is paperwork and text messages proving the driver's side of the story. Like, okay, we were in agreement, and that driver basically got robbed. They don't have the truck anymore, and nobody's willing to pay the driver back. So it's like, what does that person do? Does that person just charge it to the game?
About approximately how much did they end up paying?
Towards the truck, like 15 to 20, and then the payments due to that person were around the same amount. So in total, it was a nice little chunk of change.
So they were doing some sort of like reimbursement. So then the person was paying from their salary?
Right. It was being deducted from the earnings of the truck at the end of the week.
From the loads.
Yeah,
Oh
from
my
the loads.
gosh.
Right. So right now, that situation is still up in the air. There hasn't been any solution. There's paperwork and text messages confirming the verbal contracts, but there's nothing physically signed.
Okay. So in that situation, right, this is just me just thinking about stuff. I would still want to see everything, right? I would still want to see text messages, emails, everything that is there available. So I'm thinking there's even some employment claims there.
Right.
Because someone did not get paid the correct amount.
Right.
Right. And that was part of their employment or independent contractor status or whatever. So I would, either go to,
Get a consultation.
get a consultation with the lawyer, because I think even just there, there's some employment issues there that I think that could be an easier try to, I guess, like remedy for the truck driver. And then obviously there's additional things that you could do, more difficult. There's no contract, difficult to prove, but there's some maybe small claims, things that could be done there. I would, of course, want to see everything that's available.
Okay.
Emails, text messages, all that stuff is important. That's why they say sometimes you don't want to have certain conversations via text or email.
Right.
But in this situation,
And
it's
this
not
was amongst
great.
friends.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Even worse, because
Right,
you
right.
trust nobody. That's how
Yeah.
it should be. Trust no one.
I think, I don't want to look, I'm a lawyer and I don't want to live like that. Right. But I want to just feel good about the relationships I'm in.
Right.
So I use contracts with people, even with people that I'm like, oh, I've known them forever. I have them sign my contracts because I want to make sure that I have a good relationship with
That's
people.
the healthy way to do it. That's
Yeah.
what
And
I
if a
think.
person
Yeah.
is refusing to sign the contract, that's a red flag right there. You already know that you cannot do business with this person.
Exactly. Or
But
if they're giving you issues about that or pushing back on the contract, that's a red flag. Why?
Yes.
Why are they giving you
If you have the
such a
good
hard time?
intent,
I think the lease to purchase options are always red flags. I feel like they never work. So basically it's just to trap these people to like either stay driving for them or make money. Like, so basically these big companies buy these trucks for, let's say they bought it for $10,000. So now they sell it to the driver like, oh, do you want to be your own boss, or do you want to be an owner operator? We'll sell you your truck. So you sell them the truck. You sell the driver the truck in hopes that he feels like he's going to drive his own truck and things of that nature, and he's going to have his own trucks. But what happens is you never know what happens during, that time of that lease purchase. Now, the driver is really like a slave to that company until he pays off that truck. And say like the truck breaks down and now they're saying, okay, well, this is your truck now. and you have to take care of it. But this driver is not ready to make those payments or that repair. So guess what? Now they have to stay there even longer. Say it takes forever or work is slow, and now you can't pay these people as fast as you thought you were going to pay them because you depend on them to give you work to pay them back the money.
Right.
So their money is just recycled.
They're
It's
recycling,
crazy.
and then now you're taking forever. Now you have an old truck, which makes no sense. You know
Right,
what I'm
right,
saying?
right.
Just save your money and buy yourself your own truck. You're basically giving that company money for free.
Right. Right.
And if you do own at the end when you do own the truck, it's like, what is it worth? Was it worth all that money that
Yeah, the hassle and the no pay and the headache and everything.
It's definitely a headache for sure.
It's a lot. You have to really go through, like, really, really, like, pay attention to those. I feel like those are always red flags, and that's a scam. It's always been a scam to me. I don't see where the driver wins. I never saw a driver win from that. The lease
Right,
to
right,
purchase, never.
So, to wrap it up, some fried questions. Can I sue a broker who hasn't paid me in 90 days?
So it would depend on what you agreed upon.
Okay.
Because, and also, sometimes these contracts, you agree to what dispute resolution method you will use. Will you
Right.
go to an arbitrator? Will you go to court? So it depends.
Okay. You got to read them contracts. You got to read them rate confirmations. Make sure that you agree to all the terms before you even pull that load, before you even agree to take that load.
Yeah, it's really, really, really important. I mean, the law, obviously, we want justice for everything that happens. But like Tannia says, sometimes it makes sense. Sometimes it doesn't make sense. So make sure you choose your battles wisely,
Yeah.
I
Right,
want to
right.
say.
Yeah.
Right?
And
Right,
Tannia,
I like one of my good mentors. He owns a bunch of businesses. We disagree on things, but certain things, like sometimes we get caught up on things, right? We get hung up on things, and we're like, oh, but that bothers me so much. But sometimes you also have to think, am I worth more than that amount that I want to dispute or I go after?
Right.
Some things are not worth disputing. You can't. I mean, I would not dispute every single thing, but you have to be strategic about it, right? Like, what if you're gonna dispute something? It's because you have a good chance of winning it, or there's some real legal issues there.
Right. It's not worth the hassle. It's not worth the hassle. Listen, Tannia, with all that said, I can say, highly appreciate your visit today, you being with us
Yes.
on the podcast.
All your advice.
I'm gonna jump the line right ahead of the line, and I'm gonna say we definitely need you on the Spanish podcast. So we gotta set up that date, okay?
I thought it was today. I was
yeah.
practicing my words in Spanish.
Yeah,
we
have
can
to
come
set
back
it up.
next Sunday. Every Sunday.
The
be
Spanish
like,
show is live, so it's
yeah,
different.
it's live, and be ready. Yeah.
And how can folks reach you? Give them
Yes.
all the information so they can reach you.
So they can go to my website, theospinalawfirm.com. My number, 201-396-5274. My Instagram, at Tannia Ospina Law.
Ospina, okay? Not the Ospina or anything. Ospina.
Tannia Ospina Law.
Tannia, 2 N's. Tannia, okay?
Ospina Law.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, we want to give a really big thank you to Tannia for coming through and just giving us all this, liquid gold, this raw gold, and sharing all that information with us. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share with a trucker that you love or care for.
And if you want to come on the show,
Let us know.
DM,
Right, we're open.
DM.
Yes, give us a
another
date.
thing. Remember, stay ready so you don't gotta get ready. Read them contracts. Make sure you read them contracts. If
That's
you don't
right, that's
understand
right.
them, reach out to a lawyer so you don't get caught up in the BS.
Tannia Ospina.
Tanya, see y'all next
Thank
Sunday.
you,
Thank
guys.
you.